Hey, two videos in a row. We actually might have a schedule going on. Also, better camera, lighting is still kind of meh, audio still really good. So, hooray. Nobody watching right now. That's fine. It happens. But I want to say thank you for everyone watching later or watching now. Welcome to the Geeks for Spite, and this is Daily Comic Talk. We are going to dive headfirst into the Evolutionary Wars. This was 1988's annual event that took the annuals across most of the Marvel Universe and connected them with an overarching story that is so-so, depending on which book you're looking at. So we're going to begin with X Factor Annual number 3, and this was in 1988. This is, of course, X Factor toward the beginning of its run, which means it's the original X-Men of Cyclops, Archangel, Beast, Jean Grey, and Iceman. So it's the original 5. Of course, this is like after the college years kind of thing, when they all broke away from the professor and still needed to do mutant saving stuff. This annual takes place shortly after the big fight with Apocalypse, where they have taken over ship as their new base of operations. They've picked up like Boom Boom and Rusty Skids and Rusty, and like Leech and some of the other kids. And they're kind of like, it's New Mutants, but not really New Mutants. They were doing a lot with like this generation training the next generation, and like tracking down the new kids and getting them out of like harm's way and stuff. There's a backup story. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because there's a backup story in the annual after the main bout where it's like a game of tag. Pretty cool. Actually, it's a nice little thing where it shows like the kids using their powers, and it's a cute thing. I liked it. Just a couple of other things too. This is post Archangel, so he does have his wings again because this is after the fight with Apocalypse, and this is also that weird time frame when Hank McCoy is devolving in his mental state. Like the more he uses his super strength and agility, the dumber he gets because of what Pestilence did to him during that fight with Apocalypse. So there's a lot of Hank trying to come to grips with his deteriorating mental state, and that kind of comes into play toward the end of the story, or at least the part of the Evolutionary War story. So the story opens up on the subterranean world, so like where the mole people live, or Mole Man and his subterranean people live, and you meet these things called the Purifiers. Never a good name, honestly. It's kind of like the Inquisition. Anyway, so they're in the process of carrying out their master's orders, their master being the High Evolutionary, and removing this dead-end genetic line from humanity's possible, end result. Something you're going to find out throughout this entire event is the High Evolutionary's plan is kind of not well defined. And it's going to be like, we're going to evolve humanity to its highest peak using these things. But at the same time, he's doing things like, I'll say some of that for tomorrow because Punishers is kind of weird. But Punisher's storyline is kind of weird, but it does tie into this stuff too, but it also doesn't make sense. Anyway, so the Purifiers were there. They're wiping out all the Subterraneans, and at first things were going okay because, the Subterranean dudes are very docile. They don't want to fight. They're easily intimidated into doing what they want. But then all of a sudden, they rise up and start fighting against the Purifiers. And they can't figure out why. They don't know what's going on. At the same time, every psychic in the Marvel Universe gets hit with like this giant pulse of help me energy. It's crazy. It's very loud. It's a very powerful telepath. Something that doesn't, hasn't been seen, blah, 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 blah. It is so powerful that Jean Grey, who at this time is only a telekinetic, since the Phoenix stuff has lost her telepathy, is able to feel the telepathic pull and kind of like trace it. So while they're trying to figure out what to do and what's going on, you get this little cutaway. And Apocalypse is like he's even felt it. And he's like, "Ooh, this is something screaming out for help, and something screaming out in pain, something being tried." And he kind of figures out that it's in the subterranean world, and something there is causing all of this. And I think maybe it's time I go talk to this high evolutionary dude, and we have a come to Jesus meeting. So he does. He just shows up. Like, he knows exactly where the high evolutionary lives and pops up in his main throne room, and they start having this conversation for about 2 seconds, and then punches start flying. You're like, all right, this is going to be a decent fight. And the fight goes on for like a page or two, with them both going, well, this is getting us nowhere. And then they decide to go all like Kingdom Come. They're going to go watch this fight. Basically, Apocalypse says, humanity has to be tested in fire. It has to be tested in war. The strong survive, blah, blah, blah. The usual Apocalypse shtick. The only that in the end, it is through fire and through testing that humanity will evolve and thrive and become its best self. And the high evolutionary is like, let's skip all that and just go straight to the whole, we're at the top, we're at the apex of things. Again, I go back to the high evolutionary's entire plan is a little, I don't know, the best way to, how the high evolutionary's plan is like, just way too idealistic. Like, he's like, once we get rid of all the dead ends and we move everybody forward in evolution, then everything will be perfect. Once everyone is like me, everything will be perfect. By the way, that whole like me thing doesn't get explained until like 8-9 books in, because as a third backup, or a second backup story, a third story in this book, there is your beginnings of the history of the high evolutionary. We'll get to that in a little bit. So we go back to the fight with Apocalypse, which is no longer a fight. Now it's just a philosophical debate, and they're like going down. And in this time, X Factor's figured out where this thing is coming from. They get down there, they see the Purifiers and the Subterraneans all fighting, and basically they go, well, those dudes are really weak, and they're usually pretty harmless, and those dudes have battle armor. Those are the guys we got to fight. As they're doing this, they come across one lone Subterranean who seems to have evolved, or at least mutated. He's got a mutation. He's a mutant. He has the ability to psychically control his brethren, because they are so weak-willed, and he has that ability to like impose his will upon them because they don't have their own. So basically, he's using them as like a giant gestalt power. Um, he's out there and basically he's telling them all to fight, and they're fighting ferociously because they're fighting with the rage that he has and the fear that he has. And at first when X Factor shows up, he's in this full panic mode, and basically he's taking swings at everybody that isn't one of his peeps. And it totally makes sense. The outsiders that were here before are here to harm us. These new outsiders are probably here to harm us too, not knowing that they were there to help. But it takes a couple of minutes just for him to realize that X Factor is also fighting out the Purifiers too. These guys are apparently friends, so we can kind of at least trust them a bit. And they push back the Purifiers for a bit. They take a moment, have a breather, and as they relax, his grip over everybody kind of like softens. He loses control, and everyone sort of goes back to doing what they were doing before. Which is fine. Hey, we won. All right. But the problem is he has no fine control over this. So it just happens in moments of intense emotional energy. During the small lull in the fight, there is a conversation between High Evolutionary and Apocalypse. And Apocalypse is like, High Evolutionary is like, we don't need war. We don't need, power or whatever. We just need to take humanity's DNA and just evolve it all the way to where it should be. And these things will just die off on the sides because there's nothing of value here. And Apocalypse is like, okay, you are putting fire to these things. You are testing them. And as is my way, the strong will survive. Your test will decide whether or not they survive. And almost as like on cue, the Purifiers are like, oh, hey, they're docile again. Go get them. And they dogpile again, and they start getting wiped out. And dude sort of panics, and they figure out that specific subhuman or subterranean dude is the one that's causing all of this stuff to go on. So they get him, and they're getting ready to off him. And he's kind of panicking. And when he panics, everything goes sideways, and everybody starts fighting everything else. But Hank at the last second comes in and saves him. And, Hank's kind of like not in his smartest right now. He's like, I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to get us out of this. And he's getting ready to get whacked. And, they get ready to put poor old, Henry McCoy in the ground. And subterranean guy just like has the ability to like focus now. He's so angry. He's so frightened for this ally, friend, whoever, well-being. And he figures out how to like control all of these forces that he has all of a sudden. And once that kicks in, he is now like just mopping the floor with everybody. And Hank gets saved, everyone gets saved. Purifiers are pushed back, and they never come back again. At least the subterranean dudes, they're defeated, and they have the whole thing, and X Factor's like, hey, do you want to come? We're collecting, we're helping mutants kind of like learn their powers and keep them safe. And he's like, no, I got to stay with my people. I'm the first one to understand my people, basically. And Apocalypse gives the Evolutionary, and I told you so. You put the subterranean people under intense pressure with intense heat, and they passed the test. maybe you're wrong about this whole, that's a dead end line. Nothing good can come out of it because obviously they just defeated your forces. And High Evolutionary is like, I got to think about this. That's not good. And they kind of go their separate ways. And X Factor leaves, and that's the end of the first part of the Evolutionary War. Again, the fight scenes were really nice. The conversation and the whole philosophical debate between High Evolutionary and Apocalypse is actually really interesting. And the actual fight was pretty good. I was just hoping for a lot more, and the cover kind of promises like X Factor getting involved, but they don't. In fact, again, Apocalypse and High Evolutionary kind of stand back, and they're acting like kind of like, you know, the Spectre and the Reverend in Kingdom Come as just observers, and they're kind of like making comments about what's going on. And then when all is said and done, they leave. But after that, we get the little, like, the short story, the story number 2 of 3 in this book. Again, that's the cool thing about the annuals. They were like 60, 70 pages long. So they had a lot of room, and they put like 2 or 3 different stories in. It was trying to be kind of fun. And basically, the second story is all of the kids that X Factor has found on board ship decide to play tag. And it's a mad dash from one end to the other, all of them using their powers and kind of creatively. And then they show, and then they make it to like the control room. And after that, they find basically a yearbook where they kind of like gives you the short version of the original X-Men and their history and a little bit about each of them. And it's cute. It's a nice little character moment. You get to learn something about the kids. You get to learn something about the X-Men, the members of X Factor, if you were just jumping into this book without knowing their history in the X-Men. I don't know how like how big that would have been, just because X Factor was a spinoff book. So, but some people's first books were the spinoff books and not the core books. But that's cool. And then the third story is, of course, part 1 of the origin of the High Evolutionary. And it's just boring. Like, there's a lot of it's your typical mad scientist stuff, which is cool. I like that. I like when it's just, you know, science is evil. Dude built a genetic enhancer in his basement out of scraps. It's a story about getting to this, making his way to this symposium on genetic evolution and, you know, messing with the genetic code. And there's some little character bits in there. But the other thing is that, you know, after the symposium, he and his buddy go out drinking. He gets a little sloshed. And as he is drunkenly walking down the street, he falls into an alley, and some dude is just like, here's the human genetic code. This is everything that is wrong or what you're missing to make your machine work. Here, take it. And, you know, dude's slightly inebriated, so of course he takes it. But that's where the story ends there. Overall, this book, really good. So far, end of all the books, one of the better stories, like, that are connected to the event. But the origin story is kind of boring. There's a lot of like repetition in the story, as you'll notice down the road. Yeah, so that's X Factor Annual number 3, today's Daily Comic Talk. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about, is it Punisher War Journal or is it just Punisher? I think it is. No, it's The Punisher Annual #1 from January. I'm sorry. Yeah. January 1st, 1988. And you get to see Frank throw down with these executioners, purifiers with different body armor. But again, super science, high tech armor versus AK-47. And yeah. Otherwise, Daily Comic Talk. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the little red button down at the bottom. Like, comment, all those things that you're supposed to do to help the algorithm. But also check back here tomorrow, 7 o'clock, and we will go over The Punisher Annual #1 as we continue our look at the Evolutionary War. Well, no, we'll talk about the book tomorrow.